What's going on, guys? Back with another video. Here I am wrapping my hood, which is the second panel that I wrapped on my car because it was basically the second easiest panel. First being the roof, second being the hood. If you haven't seen the video, you could check that out. I'll drop it in the description down below. So check that one out. That is by far the easiest panel to wrap. But the hood, at least on my car, was second to that. And just by looking at it, you could kind of tell why. For the most part, it is flat. However, it does have some shallow recesses and creases in it. I know there's other hoods out there that are way worse. But mine wasn't too bad. In fact, I wrapped my hood. I filmed it. I didn't like the result that I had with it, and I just had it was decent. I had a few too many wrinkles in it. It had a few wrinkles that I just wasn't happy with. Not that I couldn't have lived with it. I just, after I did it and I saw where I messed up, I knew I could do it better, and it would just bother me if I did not redo it. So that's what I did. I did not film my first attempt. I mean, I did, but that's not what you're seeing. What you're seeing here is my second attempt. Obviously, I want to show you guys how I did it and how I did it right, and how I ended up with a result with less wrinkles in it, because it makes no sense to show you a wrap job with more wrinkles in it. So that's what I'm doing here. I am wrapping my hood again, but I have learned some valuable information. So as with any panel, before you even start, you want to clean it. Obviously, I already cleaned my whole car, disassembled everything. I removed my hood scoop, as you could tell. The hood pins are basically permanently installed. I did not want to remove them. That would just basically be way more difficult and problematic than just wrapping around them. The hood scoop is easy to remove, and as you could tell just by looking at the hood, it has that recessed area. So wrapping my hood scoop is a separate video. I'll drop that in the comments down below in the description. You could check that out. Hood scoop was actually fairly complex. It's not, in my opinion, I've never wrapped the hood scoop on a 2015 or newer WRX, but I know mine is kind of all one piece. It's not as angular, so I had to put seams in places, but I worked through it. So what I'm doing here is basically just measuring. I already know how much I need for my hood, and I am taking it off the roll and just unrolling it, and then I'm going to slice that and use that section of wrap to wrap my hood. So I think I've mentioned this in just about every video. These magnets are lifesavers. Like I said, I'm basically by myself here. I know there's other guys who have help and, can have their buddies come and hold stuff, or they have a shop or whatever. I was on my own on this build, on this wrap, so I needed all the help that I could get. So these magnets are huge. I recommend having at least 6 of them. That's how many I have. They were actually sold as a set on Metro Restyling. There's a couple different brands. I couldn't tell you what brand mine were, but they work great. So if they're available, definitely pick them up. There's a lot of guys who want to cut corners and they try to save money, but the way I see it is you're already saving money by wrapping the car yourself. So get the tools that you need in order to do the job right, because I think that's something, that a lot of people overlook or misjudge. They get so focused on how much money that they're saving that they don't purchase the tools that they need to do the job right, and then they're less than happy with the result, or they have issues with their finished product because they didn't have the tools that they needed. So I definitely recommend getting the tools that you need, and these magnets are one of them, especially if you're on your own. Even if you're not on your own, they're great to have around. So basically what I'm doing is I already cut my film. I'm just moving it into position, and I'm going to figure out, where I want to cut. I always recommend cutting a larger section of wrap than you're actually going to need, because you could always cut it down into, cut it down to size. Here, I'm just kind of eyeballing it, judging it, figuring out how I want to how I want to position it. There are, sometimes you have different features on the wrap, and you want to check out if there's any creases or scratches or cuts. Carefully look over your wrap before you put it into position, because once it's in position and you start laying it, that is not the time that you want to realize that there's a cut in it, or a scratch or a scrape or something like that, or a tear. So just think about that. It really helps if you think outside the box, because as I'm positioning this wrap, you could tell it probably could fit a couple different ways, but it really just depends on what works best. So like I said, make sure that you cut extra. You don't want to come up short, because think about it, this whole section that I just cut off, if I end up coming up short on the wrap, then unfortunately that whole entire section is going to be done, and I'm going to waste a whole sheet of vinyl rather than just a little bit. So I always recommend just cutting larger than you need, and don't worry about the few inches of waste that you're going to have. It's far better to have a few inches of waste rather than come up several feet short. So there you go. There's my offcut. Goes right in the car, so it stays nice and clean, and I know where it is later when I need to use it. Using these magnets is great, but they're magnets, so they only stick to, obviously, steel on the car, which most cars have a lot of. On the STi, the hood is aluminum. STi and WRX, the hood is aluminum. Obviously, the bumpers are plastic, so there are times or places that you can't use them. Obviously, your glass isn't going to work either. So for the most part, they worked. There were a couple other times where, I couldn't stick them anywhere. So just think about that. You might have to use tape. You might want to use something else. It just, right there on the corner, it works because I'm actually sticking it to the top of the fender rather than the hood. But, there were a couple times where I went to stick a magnet somewhere. It was like, oh yeah, that's my hood. That's aluminum. That's not going to work. But I'm using the same method for peeling this backing for this section of the hood wrap as I used for my roof, and that is I peel one corner, and then you kind of just work your way back and start peeling it backwards from underneath. It's important to do it slow and try to do it even, but you really want to just take your time with it, because if you're not doing it carefully, this is where you can get some really serious creases in your wrap. Most of the creases you could work out with some heat or, with stretching it a little bit, but sometimes they're permanent if you're not careful with it, if it's a big enough crease. So you just kind of want to be careful with that. So now that I got both corners unwrapped, I basically just can fold it back, and you'll see as I pull it off, it'll just lay real nice on top of the hood. Yeah, there's going to be wrinkles in it, but this is step one, just getting the back of the vinyl, get that backing off. Then the backing, I throw it in my car in the front seat, separate from my other wrap. It really just depends. I put it in different places. Sometimes I put it inside my car. Sometimes I, put it off to the side. Whenever I had extra time and I was working between panels, or I was taking a break or whatever, I would actually just roll up that backing and throw it in the trash. I would roll it up nice and neat, tape it, throw it in the trash, throw it in a bag, whatever, and I would deal with that. All that backing that you have can also get in the way if you don't manage it, so think about that ahead of time, where you want to put it, where you want to store it. Just basically anywhere away from where you're working. One of the, most important things is keeping a clean and obviously a safe work area. But it might sound crazy, but just throwing that on the ground causes problems. Throwing it on the ground, I've said this before, will create static. It will attract dirt and dust, which just puts more of it in the air, and it brushes against your clothes, it brushes against whatever, and then it transfers that dirt. And other than that, you could obviously step on it and slip, especially if you have two pieces together, because it's a wax backing. So with your scraps, keep them safe. With your offcuts of that backing, keep it somewhere out of the way. So you can see I'm already going to work on the hood, and I am just basically pulling out some of the wrinkles. Now, I am working on the squeegee, right? Squeegeeing out some of the air, and that's fine. You don't have to do everything all at once. I'm locking that in place where I want it because I see no wrinkles, and I know that's exactly where I want that wrap to go. I have all my corners covered, all the sides are covered. There's nowhere that I'm coming up short. At that point, I just felt like I really needed to lock that in to that section of the hood. And you notice I still have wrinkles on the front of the hood, on the passenger side front. That's fine. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But, I just kind of wanted to work on this section and kind of lock this in because I felt like if I didn't, otherwise I would just be working in circles and I would go to move something on another part of the hood and it would come off. So by taking my time and locking this in, that's going to allow me to pull harder on other areas of the hood and pull out these wrinkles without undoing the work that I already did. And you could tell, like, as I was squeegeeing there, I was just kind of taking my time and laying it into the recess. One of the most important things that I learned from watching videos from CK Wraps is you want to lay into the recesses as much as possible. Some people have this idea that they want to stretch, just pull the wrap and stretch it as far as they can, and then stretch it into the recessed areas, when you actually just kind of want to stretch the wrap where you need to, but then just easily and gently lay it into those recesses if possible. So as you can tell, I pulled the passenger side of that wrap. I basically have glass. It's not anything crazy. I'll work that into the recesses as I get there, but right now I'm just working my way around the rest of the hood, getting out whatever wrinkles I can. And I've said this before, but just read the lines, look at the wrinkles. They'll tell you where to pull. So here I am again with the soap solution. Highly recommend using a soap solution. It allows your squeegee to glide nice and neat. Applied a little bit too much, but that's okay. And then once I have that locked in on that side, I'm going to start working a little bit around the hood pins. And you kind of just need to look at the overall picture. Don't get so focused on one particular area that you lose sight of every other area of the hood, because otherwise you could basically paint yourself into a corner. You could get yourself working and not realize that there's a bigger issue or there's a bigger air bubble that you should work out. There were a couple times where I was just working, and then I realized, oh, wait, there's a huge wrinkle. Okay, let me pause, lift up this wrap, and pull out that wrinkle rather than just trying to squeegee it out. So just keep an eye on where you're working, obviously, on that section, but don't lose sight of the bigger picture of what's going on. So this is actually a good example. If you look over on the hood on the driver's side, where that recessed area is, you could actually see some of the air bubbles that are still under the wrap. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. You could also see it on the passenger side where that recessed area is. You could tell there's a slight recess in the hood, but that is not pressed all the way down to the hood itself. So as I work that out, it will actually show more of a recessed area. And that's important because, like I said, it can appear like the wrap is all the way laid down and it's nice and smooth and you have glass, but you really don't. So just keep an eye on that, and don't forget about that, because that's kind of tempting where you just look at it. It's almost deceiving. You'll just look at it and think that it's nice and smooth. Okay, I'm good to go, but you're really not. You have some other issues if you don't take care of it. So one of the tricky things with the hood pins is just working around them because they are raised, right? The rest of my hood is basically recessed and nice and even and smooth. But whenever I pull around those hood pins, it's going to cause wrinkles because they're higher than everything else around them. So I have to pull out that excess wrap and get rid of the wrinkles, but then I also have to basically lock it in and squeegee around it. So whenever I actually go to cut out the hood pins, you'll see it actually lays in fairly nice and close. Not perfect, but like I said, the wrap will shrink back a little bit, and as long as you account for that, you should be good. So that's what I chose to do. If you have hood pins, I assume you should be able to uninstall them and reinstall them. Me personally, I chose not to go that route. It really wouldn't be worth the hassle and the trouble of it. And this is a wrap job for me. Like, I know it's wrap. I understand that it's wrap. I don't care that people know that it's wrap. You know, obviously I want it to look good, but that's just one of the things that I really wasn't interested in doing for this job this time. I don't really see myself uninstalling them to install the wrap. You can. It's an option. For me, it's just not worth the effort of doing it that way. So I think one of the most frustrating things with wrap, it's kind of interesting. One of the most frustrating things is trying to get rid of the wrinkles and figuring out which way to pull the wrap and how to stretch it. But at the same time, I really can't complain about it because this wrap was so forgiving. And as you could tell watching this video, it allowed me to pull it up multiple times, touch it, push it, put it down, pick it up, touch it, put it down, stretch it, you know, and you really can't see any of that in the end result, meaning, you know, you don't see any stretch marks in it, you don't see any wrinkles, you don't see any of that, you wouldn't even know it. So I definitely recommend Avery Dennison wrap for a beginner. But yeah, the trying to get rid of wrinkles, sometimes it was just frustrating because I felt like no matter which way I pulled or how much I pulled, or if I stretched it or if I used heat, it seemed like the wrinkles wouldn't go away. But they actually do. A lot of it is, there's not one, how do I put this? There will be some issues or some instances where there's not one quick solution to the problem, okay? And what I mean by that is, if you have wrinkles, you can't just pull left and they all go away, or you just pull right and they all go away, or you just use some heat and they all go away. With this wrap, what I found is sometimes you have to pull down a little bit to the left, lock that into place, then you shift things to the right, and then you lock that into place, and then you use a little bit of heat, and you're kind of just chasing the wrinkles out more than anything. You know, that's definitely something that I learned, because going into this, I was like, oh, okay, I just pull this way, I pull that way, and then that takes care of it. But that you do need to know which way to pull, and pulling the wrinkles out and stretching it a little bit, you know, is definitely part of the process. But sometimes it's almost like a puzzle. You know, whenever you're solving a puzzle, it's not just a one-step solution. Sometimes there's a series of events. You got to work out the first problem, then you come up on a second problem, then you come up on a third problem, and it's really just working through that allows you to, you know, get the end result that you're looking for. So now that I have everything in place for the most part, all the wrinkles are out. Now I'm able to trim off some of the excess. And you could tell, like I mentioned earlier, you could see the bubbles that were on the driver's side, and now they're gone. I'm actually working out a bubble right there right now. And that's why it's important to take your time with it and not get ahead of yourself. I was able to get rid of that bubble because I was near the edge of the roof, or I'm sorry, near the edge of the hood, and I didn't totally seal everything down, so I was able to lift the wrap and work that bubble out. If you get ahead of yourself, what happens is sometimes you'll end up locking the wrap into place before you realize that there's bubbles in a certain area, and then once you have it locked down, there's nowhere for that wrap to go. You can't, you know, it's already set, it's already locked down with pressure, and you're going to have a very difficult time getting the bubbles out. So now that I have that done, I could start focusing on the area in the middle with the hood scoop. Like I said, hood scoop is getting wrapped separate. That's going to be a separate video. That is a whole other nightmare to deal with. The hood was fairly easy on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the easiest. Roof was probably a 1. This hood wrapping was probably a 1.5, possibly a 2. Really wasn't that difficult, but it was definitely more challenging than the roof. My hood scoop was probably more up near a 6 or a 7. And obviously that scale's relative. That's my experience. You know, there's probably some pros who don't have any problem with it and it's super easy, but for me, that's kind of where it lays. So the hood scoop I waited to do further down the line when I was doing more complex stuff and I had a little bit more experience under my belt, because obviously if I tried to start with my hood scoop, I would have had problems. And the second reason for waiting to do my hood scoop later is that I could use random weird shaped offcuts for it, as long as they were big enough to wrap the whole hood scoop, right? But you're going to have multiple panels, basically, that are going to have huge offcuts that are kind of weird in shape, and you should use those offcuts to wrap up some of your smaller pieces so that you're not wasting wrap. So, as you could tell, first I taped over the hood pins so that, well, for 2 reasons, really. By taping over the hood pins, that allowed me to position the wrap over the hood pin without that wrap sticking to the hood pin itself. It really doesn't stick to the painter's tape. It allows you to lift it up and reposition it and just work with it. And second is, with them being taped up, it allowed me to cut right on top of that tape, which made it very easy when it came time to cut out the hood pins. So basically what I'm doing there is just carefully trimming my wrap to the hood pins. There possibly might be a better way of doing this. I don't know. I didn't really care. Like I said, I'm just a guy wrapping my car. I'm not a professional. It's my car. It's not a customer's car. I probably wouldn't do it the same way if it was a customer's car, but I honestly would never do this as a business. I just don't enjoy it that much. It's not my gifting. It's not my calling in life. But I don't mind wrapping my own car. I would wrap friends' cars, possibly, family. Other than that, that's about it. So we're getting near to the end of this, obviously. And like I said, this is what I'm talking about when I say you could work on one area at a time. So now I'm cutting out the hood pins, right? Obviously, there's still wrap around the edges of the hood. I could have done that first and then come back to the hood pins. It really didn't matter. It's just kind of, personal preference, I guess. For me, I just felt like tackling these hood pins first and then going back to the edge of the hood. But it just depends. And honestly, I did different things in different orders on different days. Kind of just depends on your mood. You kind of get tired of working on one thing and then you'll want to change it up and do something else. So that's what I did. So now that I'm finished up with those hood pins, the next challenge for this hood is tackling the rear corners. The rear corner of the hood is a fairly aggressive corner, and it's similar to the bumpers. So if you have not watched the videos on the bumpers that I wrapped, it's the same concept. The idea being that you want to stretch that wrap and tuck it down, which is why I'm using a squeegee like I am. You want it to wrap around and tuck behind that corner. It's not just going to lay on that corner or, fold over that corner. You really want to stretch it and tuck it behind that corner. That way, whenever the wrap wants to shrink back and wants to pull, it's actually locked into that corner and it's not going anywhere. I learned that from watching one of the videos from CK Wraps, and it's held up great. 4 years later, still not peeling back on the corners. So that technique definitely works, and I highly recommend it. So here we are with the heat gun again. Heat gun is going to be your best friend when you're wrapping your car. Obviously, I think you honestly need probably all the tools that I have mentioned. The masking tape, the soapy water, the magnets for sure. You need a lot of things, like a razor blade, obviously. The fine line that I've used, I actually didn't use any of it on the hood in this video, but I used it on some other areas, which actually allows you to cut the vinyl very precisely from the back. But yeah, your squeegee is your best friend, your heat gun is your best friend, and I don't even know. Beyond that, I think those are like the two essentials, if you want to call it that. I mean, there are a lot of things that are essentials. If I had to pick a third, I'd say probably the magnets. Obviously, you need way more than that as far as tools go, but your squeegee and the heat gun are probably the two tools that I used the most through everything. And as I mentioned, I have several squeegees in varying firmnesses. Sometimes you just need something that's a little bit more firm. Sometimes you need something a little bit more flexible. Anytime you see me using the red squeegee, know that it's like a rubber squeegee. It's a very stiff rubber. It is actually the most flexible squeegee that I had, and that is because, for the most part, the wrap wants to lay down. It doesn't have, it's not real stiff. You're not trying to apply a decal to hard glass where you can really crank on it. The rubber squeegee really helps give the proper amount of pressure, but it also is soft enough to conform to the curves of the car. And you could use, even the felted side works pretty well. There were times where I had to use my hand, but for the most part, I went over it with the squeegee, and that worked great. So I apologize for this being out of frame. Hood went up a little bit higher than I was anticipating whenever I set up the camera, and it was kind of hard to get everything in frame. It's really not that big of a garage, so I actually have the camera pushed all the way back as far as it can go. But basically, I'm just taking that excess vinyl, that excess wrap, and I'm really pulling it down on the back side of the hood, on the underside of the hood. And after I do that, then I could trim off whatever excess I don't need. So, like I said, whenever I was talking about the corners, it applies to the whole edge of the hood, really. You don't want it to just end at the top. You don't want it to just fold over on the side. You actually want to wrap around to the back side of the hood, which whenever you're cleaning your car, it's crucial to make sure that you clean that underside really good, knowing that you're going to wrap underneath about a 1/2 inch or so. You really don't have to go further than a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. I think I went about a 1/2 inch. You really don't have to go further than that, but you definitely want to go at least a 1/4 inch. That is what really locks it in place. That's what gives you a nice clean edge. If you don't wrap the hood all the way to the other side, to the underside of that, it's possible that you're going to see a line if you're looking at the car from an angle or whenever you're walking up on it, depending on your panel gap on the car as well. So that's also going to keep it, lasting and looking good a long time, lasting a long time, is wrapping it all the way to the underside. So you definitely want to make sure that you're doing that. Obviously, like I said, make sure that you clean it. If it's dirty, it's not going to stick and you're going to have problems. So you can see me here with the heat gun, and I have the Michael Jackson glove, heat glove, just so that I could basically be touching and moving my hand in the area where I'm applying direct heat. So basically what I'm doing is just pulling and stretching the wrap around to the backside. After I get it all wrapped around, then I could really trim, give a final trim on how much I want the wrap to be under there. But there are times where you have to trim and you're going to have just excess, and that excess is in the way. There are other times where you use that excess to pull on to wrap, around to the backside of a panel, or, to reposition the wrap. So it's just something that you kind of have to get the hang of doing. But that's basically what I'm doing here. I'm just going to use the heat gun and my glove or a squeegee or whatever, and really just take my time, work that wrap over the edge of the panel, make sure that I don't have any any wrinkles or any stretch marks. This is one of those areas that it is fairly easy to overstretch the wrap, especially if you're working on a corner. You could just overstretch it and rip it. You definitely want to pay attention to the wrap and what it's telling you. You'll kind of get a feeling if you're stretching too much or you're pulling too hard. It will kind of let you know. Again, this is my car, so I'm being very careful with the cutting. You don't want to cut on the car if you can avoid it. Obviously, being my car, I'm a little bit less particular than I would be if this was a business and it was a customer's car. But again, that's another reason why I really wouldn't want to do this professionally as a business. So this is basically me just finishing it up. Like I said, that's all there is left to do. Trim off the excess. I'm going to pop the hood up again and then work it over with heat and make sure everything's nice and even and sealed down, and then finish off the whole hood with some post heat, which if you don't see me do that post heat step in the videos, that's because I did it as a whole over the whole car. I really wanted to keep moving in all of my wrapping videos, and if you try to post heat every panel every time, it could really kind of hinder you and just make things take even longer. So there were times where I definitely hit some areas with some post heat to kill that memory, especially in the corners and on the edges. But I made sure that I did a really good post heat over the whole car after I was done with all of my panels. I definitely didn't want to miss anything, and sometimes if you do one panel at a time, hit the critical points for sure, because even over the span of a few hours or a day or two, it could start peeling back. But I wanted to make sure that I did a solid post heat job over the whole car. And there were a couple times where I came in the next day to wrap my next panel, and even after I gave that panel heat, it was still peeling back a little bit. So I said, okay, I'm going to hit it again, and I did it again, a little bit hotter, a little bit longer, being very careful not to melt the wrap or burn the wrap or anything like that. And that took care of it. So as you can tell, I'm just working the wrap down into the seam there for the hood scoop. It's going to pop out here and there, but obviously once I place the hood scoop there, it's going to be seamless. You're not even going to see that it's a wrap, and it's going to lock that edge in place. So that's about it for wrapping the hood. I hope you guys were able to tell what I was doing and how I was pulling, what directions I was pulling, and how I worked the wrap down into all the crevices. So if you haven't seen the hood scoop video, I'll drop a link in the description down below. I hope you guys learned something, and I'll catch you in the next one.